been a long time since I've been here. Such a beautiful place. There aren't many investigations that I think about continually. This is one of them. In my 30 years as a police officer, this was the largest investigation I've been involved with. I know I could have done things better. And how I could have done things differently does live with me.
Chemin forestier, 4 personnes ont été retrouvées mortes.
In France, police have launched a multiple murder inquiry near Lake Annecy.
On the 5th of September 2012, 3 members of a British family were found dead in their car.
Police have brought in 60 officers and sealed off a woodland area.
Nearby, a 7-year-old girl had been shot and left for dead.
The young girl has been airlifted to hospital in a critical condition.
Next to the girl, a French cyclist had also been shot.
The cyclist was found dead near the vehicle.
The crime scene was covered with bullet casings.
The motive for their murder is a mystery.
We do everything we can to get to the bottom of what happened.
The question of why they were shot would lead to a 10-year investigation, steeped in mystery.
It can't be true. 4 innocent people killed in cold blood.
What motivated such a brutal attack?
Why Saad? Why his family? Was he targeted?
Everybody got skeletons in the closet.
They had fallen out, no two ways about that.
There's obviously a whole range of murky facts.
Then I got a text. This is the FBI.
The discovery of the weapon could suggest he feared an attack.
Espionage, Mossad, CIA.
There was something not right about this investigation.
We need to extend our cordon more.
Then the arrival of a bomb disposal team.
It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense.
Suddenly, everything that we thought we knew was completely wrong.
Targeted execution.
A professional
all shot in the head.
Secret Service.
€1 million.
Iraqi spy.
But on some nuclear stuff.
Somehow he was poisoned.
Why were they shot?
Claygate is a sleepy little Surrey village. There's a train station, Church of England school, nice neighbours. Nothing really ever happens there.
This story begins with an ordinary family in a peaceful English suburb.
Saad was a lovely man, massively helpful, and any help I ever needed with anything, he was immediately on the scene.
Saad al-Hili had lived in Claygate for more than 20 years.
Just, I would say, a normal family. Just, I never noticed anything unusual about them or anything. They just seemed polite. Used to come out and say good morning, that was it.
Saad was an engineer who worked for a local company. He was married to Iqbal, a trainee dentist. They'd been together for nearly 10 years.
Iqbal would always feed anybody that turned up. Typical Surrey wife, I would say.
And they were happy together, got 2 children. Perfect scenario, they seem really happy in life.
Saad absolutely loved being a dad. He doted on his 2 daughters.
Their eldest daughter, Zainab, was 7, and their youngest, Zina, was 4.
The 2 children were absolutely adorable. The girls played delightfully together. They never fought. They were a very close-knit family. Zainab, the older one, was very articulate.
The younger daughter was quite cheeky, but very funny.
Zina had a penguin. The penguin went everywhere. One in the car, one in the caravan, one in the wash. So she'd never anywhere without a penguin. Saad was always hugging, kissing the kid, He just loved his kids so much.
My brother, he had so many interests, was always on the go. Saad loved fun. He had lots of jokes, and the jokes never stop. He wasn't politically correct, as they call it now.
Saad was very funny, and he used to laugh from his heart. Yeah, that's how Saad was.
At the end of the summer, the Al-Hillis decided on a last-minute family holiday.
Saad was spontaneous, let's just go, we don't need to book a hotel, we've got a caravan. And there's a campsite there and a campsite there, and see where they got.
The last time I saw Saad was the night before he went to France. He said, would I keep an eye on his house? And of course I said I would.
Turn right onto Banstead Road South.
The family took along Iqbal's mother, Sahela, and made their way for the night ferry to France. They were headed to a favoured spot in the French Alps. Over the next week, they toured around Lake Annecy. Then, on the 7th day, they took a trip into the mountains. On their way, they stopped to take in the view in a nearby village. Then began the drive into the woods towards a local beauty spot. Minutes later, most of the family would be dead.
I remember thinking first time I came up here, how easy it would have been for anybody to just discard anything, be it a weapon or anything else.
Mark Preston was one of the senior investigating officers on the case. He took charge on the British side 8 months after the murders.
Finding out the truth is something that runs through the veins of any detective. This was mysterious. It was far from being a typical murder. The main thought was, with the road like this, how could anybody follow the Al-Hillis in their car? So this is where it's all happened. When police first arrived, they found a quite chaotic scene with a number of bodies across the car park. Looked like this. We had the British registered BMW that had been reversed into the bank and was still stuck. In front was the body of the dead French cyclist, some metres away from where his bike was found. But on the other side of the car was 7-year-old Zainab, laying face down, badly injured. The BMW's windows were shattered with bullet holes. Inside were 3 bodies. This was an extraordinarily unusual crime scene. 4 adults, all of whom had been shot, but what was most shocking was the shooting of a 7-year-old child.
On a découvert de 4 corps, mais a priori victimes de tirs par arme à feu. Il y a un grand nombre de douilles sur la scène de crime.
Local prosecutor Eric Mayo took charge of the investigation. He called in a specialist forensic team based 8 hours away in Paris.
Pour des raisons bien évidemment que vous imaginez aisément de qualité de l'enquête, pour l'instant on ne peut pas approcher des corps.
7-year-old Zainab had been airlifted to hospital and was in a critical condition. But the investigators hadn't realised someone was missing.
Then a bombshell for the investigation. The manager of the campsite where the family had been staying called the French police and said, there is another child, a child who is only 4 years old.
Where was little Zina?
Les enquêteurs recherchent une fillette dont on pouvait craindre qu'elle ne soit morte.
You have to consider all options. Had little Zina been taken by the killer? Or run into the woods in fear of her life? And if she could be found, would she be found alive?
While the French police continued their search for 4-year-old Zina, investigators had discovered there was another cyclist in the forest at the time of the shootings. And he was also British. His name was Brett Martin.
Brett Martin was a former RAF pilot who had a holiday home in that area and had decided that afternoon to go for a ride on his bike.
What Brett described to the French police painted a picture of the victim's movements just before the murders.
Brett Martin explained to the French police how he had been overtaken by another cyclist who he said must have been Sylvain Mollier, the 4th victim shot at the scene. He also told the French police that he was passed by the Al-Hillis in their car. The distance in time between when the murders happened and Brett arriving is probably as close as we would get to a witness actually being there.
First thing I saw was a bike on the side, and I'd seen the cyclist ahead of me much earlier, so I thought he was just having a rest. As I got a little bit closer, a child stumbled out into the road, and at first I thought she was actually just playing with a sibling, because she sort of looked from a distance like she was falling over, larking about like a child would. However, as I approached her, it was obvious that she was quite badly injured and there was a lot of blood on her. And as I got even closer, I then saw the car with its engine revving and wheels spinning. She was lying in a position that was in front of this car with its wheels spinning. So my immediate thought was she needed to be moved in case the car lurched forward and should run her over or anything. So I sort of gently attended to her and put her in a recovery position as best I could. It seemed like there's been a terrible accident between a cyclist and a car, but there were things that didn't quite match because the cyclist's bike wasn't beside him.
Brett Martin told the French police that when he went to move the cyclist, he realised at that point that he'd been shot and that everybody else in the car had also been shot.
It seemed to me just like a Hollywood scene. There was a lot of blood and heads with bullet holes in them.
À 23h30, les techniciens en investigation criminelle, ils venaient tout juste d'arriver. Et ensuite, ils ont commencé d'analyse de la scène de crime. Si un enquêteur commence à investiguer n'importe comment, au risque de polluer la scène de crime, ils ont commencé à s'approcher de ce véhicule en cercle pour essayer de repérer visuellement les munitions. les enquêteurs ont ouvert la porte. Ils ont vu un mouvement sous les jupes. Et ils ont découvert Zina.
Investigators say they found a 4-year-old girl alive, hiding in the back of the vehicle.
An astonishing discovery. A 4-year-old girl found under dead bodies many hours after the murder scene was sealed off by the police.
On a découvert une toute petite fille, environ 4 ans, sans doute terrorisée, complètement dissimulée, complètement immobile, au milieu des corps.
C'était un très grand moment d'émotion. Je le ressens dans ma voix d'ailleurs en vous parlant de cette nuit profonde, noire, un éclairage blafard. Il n'y avait plus d'enquêteurs, il y avait des êtres humains et des pères de famille. Et dont celui qui est devant a cette petite fille dans ses bras, avec cette petite fille qui s'est mise à sourire. C'est une scène que je peux décrire, je m'en souviendrai absolument toute ma vie.
Good morning. Police in southeast France investigating the murder of a British family in their car say they found a 4-year-old girl alive, hiding in the back of the vehicle.
The cyclist was also found dead near the vehicle along with a young girl who is said to be in a critical condition.
On the 6th of September, I had breakfast in the living room. One of the news reports was a British family was killed in France. I remember thinking, very sad. Then I showered, dressed, and went to work as normal.
Here in Annecy, a major investigation is underway, and in the last hour, police have named the father as Saad al-Hili from Surrey.
At 1:15, I picked up the call from my friend. He said to me, there are reports about my brother Saad involved in a shooting. I said, it can't be. It can't be them. He said, I've tried his number many times and I can't get through. I went to the nearest police station, hoping to hear it's not them. Yeah, something which is really something you can't imagine happening to you and your family. I was thinking, it can't be true. Why were they shot?
Hundreds of journalists from around the world descended on the French Alps.
I had an immediate sense, because of the numbers of journalists on the plane, this is not an ordinary murder. It was something that was way beyond that. Arriving in Annecy, I went to the Palais de Justice for the press conference. Eric Mayo walked into the room. He looked like a rabbit in the headlights. The prosecutor would certainly feel the heat if there was a failure in a major investigation like this.
Vous avez tous entendu, bien évidemment, qu'une seconde fillette avait été découverte sous les jambes d'une des femmes décédées, sous les jupes, ce qui explique que personne ne l'ait vue avant. Elle a 4 ans et elle est d'un petit gabarit. Une petite fille de 4 ans qui n'a rien dit de particulier, si ce n'est la peur, la terreur, le cri, la fureur.
I heard that Zina was found hiding in the well of the car. She was missed by the gunman. To have a gun being pointed at you, not moving and not making any sound. Very clever and very quick thinking, you know, to hide there. She's so brave. I think it's a devastating thing to imagine.
The fact that the little girl had not been discovered certainly coloured my view of the way the investigation was being run.
Les choses doivent se faire de manière méthodique. Il lui a paru souhaitable, effectivement, de s'associer le meilleur des services d'enquête, sans quoi on risque fort de ne jamais retrouver les auteurs de ce crime.
And when we were told they had waited 8 hours for experts to arrive from Paris, it seemed such a strange way to operate. This really was turning into an increasingly bizarre, weird, and extremely worrying story.
4-year-old Zina was taken to hospital. Her 7-year-old sister Zainab was still in a critical condition, and doctors placed her in an artificial coma.
Concernant la fillette plus âgée, Zaima, 7 ans, il semblerait qu'elle présente un certain nombre de coups, de fractures du crâne et a priori une blessure par balle au niveau de l'épaule.
As the only witnesses to the murders, both girls were placed under heavy armed guard.
The next morning, the press started congregating, basically besieging my flat, constantly ringing the bell, knocking on the door, stopping people who lived in the building, thinking it was me. I refused to speak to them. As the day went on, and more of them with big cameras and lenses, literally I had to sort of duck from one room to another to move. I got myself off and wasn't even listening to the news. I don't think I could handle that sort of thing. At 10 o'clock, when it's dark, the police came to fetch me. They said because of the glare of the press, they were going to take me out of my flat. They said pack a small suitcase, and then they took me to a police compound, and I had 2 policemen staying with me on either side of my room.
Saad Al-Hili left his home here in Claygate, towing his caravan to France for a family holiday. But this afternoon, the police arrived and local people began to realise that it was their own neighbour who'd been brutally murdered in France.
As the police began to search the Al-Hili family home, news reporters began their own investigations.
A number of people locally have been bringing flowers, and bouquets have been left by police officers at the front door.
There's certainly a feeling of a real loss from certainly my daughter's class.
8-year-old Zainab should have returned to school. Her little sister Zaina was due to start this term.
It just feels wretched, and just to obviously hear the reports earlier on the news, on the radio, what happened to the other little girl just feels absolutely awful.
Journalists were speaking to neighbours, many of whom were very happy to talk glowingly about Saad and the family.
Saad was a lovely man. The 2 children were absolutely adorable. And I just can't begin to imagine how they're going to cope with the rest of their lives. It's heartbreaking.
But 1 or 2 details emerged which suggested that something had been troubling Saad in particular.
What the Al-Hili friends and neighbours told the journalists would change the face of the investigation.
The police do not know why this family was targeted, but this neighbour says Mr. Hili may have said something of interest before he went on holiday.
I do know he had a slight problem. He said one thing that may or may not be of significance, and I have passed that on to the police, but I wouldn't say anything more than that.
So the first thing that I think was the most important thing was where the gunman was.
3 days after the murders, the French police had begun to piece together what they believed happened at the crime scene.
Now, there was a theory that the gunman was hidden in this gully. It's the perfect place to hide. There isn't a better place to hide here. The theory was the killer was here, hiding in the gully. When the Al-Hillis arrived, they parked the car here, facing forward. Saad and 7-year-old Zainab got out of the car to look at the map. French cyclist Sylvain Mollier was here next to his bike. This is where the investigators believe everyone was just before the shooting started. We know the Al-Hillis weren't here for very long because only 2 of them had alighted from the car. And from where Saad is, it's entirely possible he was looking at the tourist boards. The main theory was that the whole sequence of events were actually very quick. Saad was the first person shot. Bang, bang. We know that Zainab didn't make it back into the car. And then Mollier runs. Bang, bang. He's taken shots and fallen. Saad is back in the car and he's reversing. The gunman can't let it escape. Bang, 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 bang. The gunman's now in front of the car. His tyres are still in reverse and stuck against the bank there. Zainab was hiding on that side of the car. So Saad is sitting here, knowing that his daughter is outside the car. He's just seen this gunman walk towards him or in front of him. And he knows he is going to die, and he knows his family's going to die. And it's heartbreaking. And in the back seats, bang, bang. Then he comes back down to the front where Zainab is, and using the gun, has hit her head. And the last shot we thought to be fired is Mollier, whose body is prostrate on the floor, and it's an absolute execution. And bang! It's an incredibly brutal attack to recall on a group of defenceless individuals, and it's hard to fathom what reason anybody would have to do this.
We now know that at least 21 bullets were fired into the car, and every one of the victims shot in the head.
As we've been told they were shot in the head, it led all of us to believe that this was a hit, a targeted assassination.
Very rare, certainly in the UK, to have multiple victims. The gunman came with a lot of bullets, a lot of ammunition, intent on taking out any potential witnesses. This is somebody who may well have killed before, somebody who knows how to handle a gun.
Police in France have given more details of the shootings.
Cycliste Sylvain Mollier retrouvé mort sur place.
Il s'agit d'un Savoyard de 45 ans, père de 3 enfants en congé ce jour-là.
By the 3rd day, police were able to identify the French cyclist. Sylvain Mollier had only recently been in a new relationship with the daughter of a wealthy local businessman. The family made it clear they would not welcome any attention from the press. They placed a very brief obituary in the local newspaper saying that he was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Lorsque vous découvrez autant de cadavres, il est bien évident que l'on essaye de comprendre quelles sont les possibilités. Et le cycliste français pouvait être là par hasard. Ça, c'est effectivement une des premières interrogations. Vraiment le sentiment que ça ne pouvait pas être une cible.
As the French cyclist faded from view, the spotlight on the family from Surrey intensified. But the motive for their murder remained a mystery.
I was cooperating fully with the police. I answered all their questions. They wanted to know the background of our family and everything about my brother. Saad was born in Iraq in 1962. He's 3 years younger than me. I'm the quieter one, probably the more responsible. My mother avoided going to the parents' meeting because he was a rascal. We left Iraq in 1971. We came over to the UK, to London. I found it very hard, culturally completely different. Saad, however, he was more outgoing. He made friends a lot quicker.
I first met Saad when I went to Pimlico School. It was 1972. One of the best friends I've ever had in my life. He was a practical joker, a bit of a clown. Had a lot of common interests as well, skiing.
Saad came many, many times. Zaid was a bit more sensible.
He was reserved.
Reserved, that's a good word.
After the death of their mother in 2003, the brothers agreed that Saad would stay living in the family home.
Saad and I stayed very close. We didn't hide anything from each other. He's got me and I've got him. It's in 2011. I moved into Claygate with Saad and his family for a few months, and we were out there in the summer enjoying the good weather. I remember that period very well. We had a good time. November, I moved out of Claygate. That was the last time I saw him.
On this alpine campsite, there is one abandoned caravan. The Al-Hili family left their pitch for a day trip, but they never returned. The police are looking for anything that could explain why the parents were shot dead in front of their children.
When the French police searched the Al-Hili's caravan, what they found only added to the mystery of the murders.
Sur ce que l'on a découvert dans la caravane de Saad Al-Hili, donc tous ces supports informatiques et tous ces documents, on l'a découvert en exploitant les supports informatiques, sa vie entière était dans les supports informatiques.
Nous avons trouvé effectivement de nombreux documents.
We found a number of documents, computers, hard disks. I don't suppose you would go on holiday with that sort of arsenal of information.
En vacances, vous partiez avec tout votre arsenal informatique.
Ceci dit, quand on a exploité son ordinateur, on a quand même découvert de nombreux documents de travail que théoriquement il n'était pas censé avoir.
Some of the drives were encrypted and there were lots of official documents. Why would you take them on holiday? Stranger still, they couldn't find the Al-Hili's passports. Not within the vehicle, not within the caravan. They had effectively disappeared. Were the passports taken by an assassin as a trophy to prove, yes, I killed them?
The discoveries made in the Al-Hili's caravan led to a new hypothesis. Had Saad gone to the woods to sell or exchange secrets in a meeting that went wrong?
It was an unbelievable theory. Could Saad be a spy?
Saad worked for a firm in Guildford called Surrey Satellites, and he had other business interests.
He was a design engineer. He worked on some nuclear stuff, and then he did some stuff with satellites.
It was thought that his professional expertise might have made him an attractive proposition to an enemy country which had designs on satellite technology for its own purposes.
Un ingénieur d'origine irakienne avec ce fantasme de l'Irak, Saddam Hussein, enfin, on a tous ces images qui viennent à l'esprit, cette histoire du pays, cette violence.
Reporters dug into the Al-Hili's background and unearthed claims that they had been watched by the Secret Service.
We're going to go to Westminster and talk to Dominic Raab, the Conservative MP for Esher.
I lived in Claygate, a couple of streets down from where the family lived. There's obviously a whole range of murky facts.
When I saw the front pages of the newspapers, oh, Iraqi spy shot in France, I felt there was a media bias based on Saad's skin colour. So I drove round to Claygate and the whole media circus was there. I pointed out that the family had moved when Saad was 10 from Iraq. They had settled in England and they considered themselves a British family with kids in a Church of England school, but they'd already decided that he was foreign.
Any hint or special branch or Secret Service involvement, you've got to consider everything. You're looking at espionage, terrorism, nothing is off the table.
Though we knew them well, we didn't know everything about them. They could keep elements of their life secret.
Absolutely, there was very intimate personal stuff that we did not know. Saad was a big e-bet, and he bid on a safe, high security thing. So I said, what do you want a safe for? And he said that he wanted to put certain documents so that they were secure if anybody got in the house.
Tonight it was confirmed officers are using power tools to try and open a safe there, and specialist resources from other forces have been brought in.
They all wanted to know if we are associated with any mosque, if I handled a gun, and whether my brother had any guns. Then they found a taser.
The French prosecutor has confirmed that the stun gun was found during the search of the family home.
The discovery of the weapon could suggest he feared an attack.
You have to wonder who would keep a taser at home and why.
Could that have shown a fear within Saad's own mind that actually he might be a target of some kind of violence? Or was he planning an attack himself?
This morning, a brief but dramatic turn of events.
We need to extend our cordon more.
Not a sight you would expect in the leafy streets. Soldiers, a bomb disposal unit.
So how far do you want us to go up?
Where you're, yeah.
Oh, really?
Past the trees.
That far?
Yes.
Crikey.
Des substances potentiellement explosives, c'est ce qu'ont trouvé les enquêteurs britanniques dans la maison des Al-Hili près de Londres.
All of this kind of added up to a really uncomfortable feeling that there could be something here.
As neighbours were evacuated, the bomb squad examined strange substances in the Al-Hili's home.
The focus, a shed in the back garden.
Might there be explosives inside?
After a few hours, the bomb squad left and the police confirmed nothing hazardous was found at the house. But with no motive still, it's a sign of just how sensitive this investigation is.
They sealed the area off because there might have been a bomb. If it had been my house, might it have been a bomb?
In France, the two Al-Hili girls were still being cared for in hospital. And doctors had begun attempts to bring Zainab out of her artificial coma.
Prosecutors here continue their investigations, desperate for a substantial lead. The main hope rests with 7-year-old Zainab. Perhaps if her condition improves, she may provide the key as to what horrors took place here.
There was a huge amount of speculation that if she emerged from that coma, would she be able to speak? And could she actually lead them to the person who was holding the gun?
She had been pistol whipped and was traumatised. But if Zainab woke up, what could she tell us about the killer?
Specially trained detectives are now preparing to interview 7-year-old Zainab Al-Hili.
News came from the hospital that Zainab had emerged from her coma and police officers had been able to speak to her, albeit briefly and in very controlled conditions.
Interroger Zainab était absolument fondamental. C'est la seule témoin. de ce crime horrible. Il n'y en a pas d'autre. Zeynab Halili a expliqué que son papa est sorti du véhicule. Et c'est à ce moment-là que Saad a vu manifestement quelque chose. Et il lui a intimé l'ordre, lui a crié dessus en lui disant « remonte dans la voiture ». Avant soudain que Zeynab n'entende les coups de feu. Elle part d'une silhouette, elle parle de cris. Et ensuite, tout a été fini assez rapidement.
But one major detail she was able to provide was that there was only one killer, who she called the bad man.
The first thing I wanted to know how Zainab was doing. Is she going to survive? When I asked the police if I could go, they didn't give me an answer. I have a feeling that they wanted the girls to be separate from me.
Les deux fillettes sont hospitalisées dans des établissements séparés et placées sous haute protection policière.
I thought it was unusual that Zaid did not fly out to France. He, after all, was the uncle of the two little girls. It did strike me as peculiar.
Il faut également que l'on trouve des membres de sa famille, que l'on puisse s'assurer. Vous imaginez bien qu'on ne peut pas remettre la fillette au premier ou à la première personne qui présenterait des papiers d'identité au nom de Al-Hili, par exemple.
The family name was mentioned as if not to involve the Al-Hili family. And the only person who was that was me.
A week after his investigation began, French prosecutor Éric Maillot arrived in Britain with more questions than answers. He's now convinced the key to solving the Alps massacre lies not there, but over here.
Annecy n'est que le lieu fortuit de ce drame et que vraisemblablement l'origine, les causes et les explications sont ici chez vous.
With the investigators' eyes now fixed on the UK, detectives interviewed the Al-Hili's close family and friends.
The investigators came to my house. One spoke to John in one room, one spoke to me in another room.
They weren't only interested in the murder, they were interested in his whole background, the family's background from when we'd known them. Doesn't necessarily put Zaid in a good light, but I told them the truth of what I knew, so I didn't trust Zaid anymore. That's what he told me the last time I saw him, which always plays on my mind.
The police asked me how many telephones I had, and they wanted a DNA swab. I was interviewed for hours. I was asked whether my brother had any disputes with anybody. But to be honest with you, I can't remember whether there were any. I don't think my brother had any disputes with anybody.
They had fallen out. No two ways about that. Zara told me that there'd been a breakdown in their relationship over inheritance.
As far as I'm concerned, there was no dispute. The question here was inheritance. To me, it was an irrelevant matter.
That story, of course, dominating, with French prosecutors saying a family dispute over money is one of their lines of investigation.
Évidemment, il a entendu parler des conflits entre lui et son frère pour dire « Mais attendez, je n'ai pas de conflit avec mon frère ». Tout le monde parle d'un litige comme si c'était une évidence. Le principal intéressé dit qu'il n'y en a pas.
Zaid said that there was no dispute, no animosity between them. I don't think that was Zaid being truthful.
You'd have to ask him why he said that, because I've got no idea.
There could be any number of reasons why Zaid would choose to deny a dispute. But where you have a motive alongside a lie, Yes, of course, it raises your suspicion.
Il est certain que quelqu'un qui nie une évidence, c'est suspect, c'est louche. On se demande pourquoi.
It was said that you were a liar and that you lied about the dispute.
To me, there was no dispute. My brother had issues, and he made up issues.
It was also suggested that you organised the killing of your family. Why are you laughing?
Because it's so ridiculous. You have to see the funny side of things sometimes. That's how I cope with it.
Did you organise someone to kill your family?
Well, I didn't organise the killing of my family. It's a silly thought. It's rubbish. I wouldn't kill anybody.
Support information for the issues raised can be found online at channel4.com/support. And Murder in the Alps continues next here on Channel 4.
There is no doubt that this is the most complex and challenging investigation that I've been involved with. What causes somebody to murder 3 members of the same family? Saad al-Hili, his wife Iqbal, and her mother Suhaila. And to shoot one of their children. Unconnected to them, it would seem, the French cyclist Sylvain Mollier. What connects them all? What causes that to happen? We knew that finding the killer would be very difficult. But we could never have predicted where this investigation was going to take us.
In France, police have launched a multiple murder inquiry near Lake Annecy.
In September 2012, 4 people were shot dead in the French Alps.
There was a lot of blood and heads with bullet holes in them.
A 7-year-old girl, also shot, was airlifted to hospital. Hours later, the police found her younger sister.
Late last night, an astonishing discovery. A 4-year-old girl found alive under dead bodies inside the car.
C'est une scène que je peux décrire, je m'en souviendrai absolument toute ma vie.
The 2 surviving girls were the only witnesses.
One major detail the eldest daughter would provide was that there was only one killer, who she called the bad man.
The motive for their murder is a mystery.
Every one of the victims shot in the head.
The police began to investigate if this was a targeted assassination.
On a vraiment le sentiment que Sylvain Mollier ne pouvait pas être une cible.
Why Saad? Why his family?
We found a number of documents, computers, hard disks. I don't suppose you would go on holiday with that sort of arsenal of information.
Could Saad be a spy?
There's obviously a whole range of murky facts.
Then they found a taser.
The discovery of the weapon could suggest he feared an attack.
A family dispute over money is one of their lines of investigation.
Saad didn't trust Zaid anymore.
They had fallen out over inheritance.
Clearly there was an impossible motive for Zaid to want his brother dead.
It's rubbish. I wouldn't kill anybody.
Targeted execution.
A professional
all shot in the head.
Secret Service.
€1 million.
Iraqi spy.
Worked on some nuclear stuff.
Somehow he was poisoned.
Why were they shot? I was called for another interview. That was from 12 o'clock till 9 o'clock in the evening.
Zaid contacted me. He was concerned after his first interview with the police, in which he was told he was going there as a witness. But the level and the type of questions asked of him made him feel he was more than a witness. He didn't like the way that the questions were developing. His second interview seemed to be taking place in really the front room of a house in the middle of a suburban street, probably a police safe house. So it was an unusual setting for an interview.
We were informed that Zaid was going to be questioned. We were all convinced that the answer to this mystery must have something to do with him.
I was aware that the French police were in the building, although they weren't interviewing him directly.
Les enquêteurs français étaient très souvent présents aux côtés des enquêteurs britanniques dans une pièce à côté qui permet d'entendre. Et à l'occasion d'une pause, ça permet aussi entre enquêteurs d'échanger. On n'aurait pas lui poser telle autre question, qui ont un objectif, rendre l'audition la plus utile possible et en tirer le maximum d'informations.
The British detectives began to question Zaid about where he was on the day of the murders.
The 5th of September 2012, I went to Worthing with a friend. We had ice creams, fish and chips later on. The weather was very calm that day. The sea was calm, so peaceful. Yeah, and it was just a normal day for me. Of course, I got to know later how, things were happening. A lovely day, sort of. Later on turned out to be completely the opposite.
It was clear in the room that there were tensions between the French and the British at an early stage.
Et il y avait effectivement une divergence de vues entre la police britannique et la gendarmerie française. On souhaitait que Zaid Halili vienne en France pour pouvoir avoir une totale liberté dans les questions à lui poser.
The French probably wanted to ask him outright, did you murder your brother? Which the British police would not ask of a person who was simply a witness.
I was asked whether I want to meet the French investigators. I refused.
Donc quand on est innocent de quelque chose, les enquêteurs ont du mal à comprendre pourquoi on ne veut pas dialoguer avec eux.
I gave them all the information and answered all their questions, but I was worried about where is this actually leading to? What is the next step? What's going to happen next?
Zaid had a very well-grounded alibi to show that he wasn't in France, that he wasn't the person behind the trigger. So the investigation would have to look elsewhere to find out who did.
You can still see the tyre marks on the banking where the car reversed. And this is where it eventually came to rest, where 4 lives were ended and the innocence of 2 childhoods shattered.
In France, the police tried to identify any vehicles near the crime scene.
Sylvie Lecour is a key witness in the investigation and may have seen the gunman leaving. She was nearly run off the road. A speeding car came towards me from up the mountain path, she tells me. He was swerving to get past and going very fast. No one drives like that round here.
There were lots of sightings of vehicles immediately after the murders happened that were reported to the police. One that was considered significant was a motorcycle noticed at the scene.
A forestry worker claims he saw a man dressed in black on a black and white motorbike. 2 of his colleagues also saw the bike 10 minutes later. He doesn't want to be identified.
They passed the motorbike I had passed at Place Martinet 2 bends further up. So they had words with him because motor vehicles aren't allowed. So they asked him to drive down. They saw his face. He had a bit of a beard.
The first witness on the scene, Brett Martin, also saw the motorbike driving back down the road past the site of the shootings.
Et c'est bien évidemment un parking isolé de montagne, un lieu où vous n'avez strictement aucune caméra. Si vous étiez en moto tout-terrain, vous aviez d'autres sentiers de randonnée par lesquels vous pouviez quitter la scène de crime.
From witness statements, the French police created a sketch of the motorcyclist, but for now, kept it secret from the public.
The decision not to release the photo fit in the early days was a cause of frustration between the British and French investigators. Clearly, by the time it was released, the motorcyclist could have been anywhere.
Kept ringing and ringing with this number that I didn't recognize. So then I got a text saying, please answer your phone, this is the FBI. And I answered the phone and he said, do you know anything about your former sister-in-law, Kelly? He told me that Kelly had been killed in a very gruesome way. Of course, it truly upset me.
Judy knew her former sister-in-law as Kelly Thompson. But her real name was Iqbal al-Safar. And she would later marry Saad al-Hili.
I knew her by Kelly. That's what we knew her by. All-American name. I didn't know she had kids. I didn't know she moved to England. I just thought she went to be a dentist in Iraq. I didn't know anything about that until the murder.
On discovering that Iqbal had lived in America in the late 90s, the French police began to investigate.
So this is the pool area where we would all come out and go swimming and conversate and cut up and have a good time. Kelly fit into the family very easily, it seemed like. She was a sweetheart, man. You know, just a very sweet person. I never seen a frown on her face, really, you know, honestly. I loved her, man. She was a good lady, you know. I wish she could have stuck around a little bit longer, you know.
Detectives discovered that 4 years before she married Saad, Iqbal had moved to Louisiana to live with Jim Thompson.
My dad, back then, he was the best, you know. Very charismatic, very sociable. If you met him, y'all were best friends by the time the conversation was over with. When he told me about Kelly, I was probably 12, 13 at the time. He said that she would be staying with us for a while.
And then my brother Jim walks in the door and says, I'd like for you to meet my wife, Kelly. I'm like, what? He said, yeah, we stopped at Judge Wiltie's office and got married on the way. I'm like, you're kidding me. He says, no.
She was very, very beautiful. Not what I expected from seeing women in Iraq all covered up.
Iqbal lived in Louisiana for nearly 18 months, but kept this former life secret from many of her friends in England.
Iqbal, I've known her from the University of Baghdad. She was very shy. She didn't really talk a lot. To know that she lived in the States and she was very westernized, for me, it doesn't sound like it's the same person. It's shocking.
She dressed differently. She seemed to enjoy the lifestyle, hanging around by the swimming pool, having barbecues. This really contradicted the impression we'd been given of Iqbal in Claygate, being a very reserved person, seemingly quite traditional, respecting her Iraqi and Muslim background. This was a completely different person.
My wife had been quite close with Iqbal, and she said, is that the same Iqbal?
Investigators began to look closely at Iqbal's former husband, Jim Thompson. What they discovered made them question everything.
There were physical similarities between the person that we think was in the car park riding a motorbike on the day that Iqbal was murdered and her first husband. Could Jim Thompson have been the motorcyclist?
In America, investigators started to look into Iqbal's relationship with her former husband, Jim Thompson.
Kelly and my dad, they were very happy. It was all just very loving, actually, you know, they cared for each other.
I went to their house to see Jimmy. She was there, and she was introduced to me as his wife. I didn't know anything about her past, and I didn't ask no more questions, you know.
We fell in love with her from day one, but I could feel the pressure on her, and I sensed all that. And I just remember she came and told me she had to leave. And it just broke my heart. And I told her I didn't understand, and she just hugged me and cried.
After Iqbal left the US, Judy never saw her again.
It was just so all of a sudden. But I didn't want to question her. I felt there was a secret. I just felt that there was just more.
Saad used to make fun of Iqbal about her secrecy. I remember she didn't want to have an email. And when he asked her why, she said, "What if people know where I am?" He looked at her and he laughed and said, "Who do you think you are? What if people know where you are?" At the time it was a joke, it was meaningless, but we just don't know now.
When we looked into Jim Thompson, we discovered he couldn't have been the killer.
What the investigation uncovered next was incredible.
Jim Thompson died in the United States on the same day that Iqbal and her family were murdered. It was just like, wow.
This was either a bizarre coincidence, or perhaps Jimmy Thompson was also targeted on the same day.
In France, the two surviving Al-Hili girls, Zainab and Zina, were finally flown home under close police protection.
Zainab et sa petite sœur Zina sont rentrées en Angleterre. Elles sont placées dans une famille d'accueil sous la protection des services sociaux.
Les deux petites filles du couple vivent désormais sous une fausse identité pour leur propre sécurité.
Not knowing who was involved in the killing, on whether the Al-Hilis were the targets, we had to consider the risk against the two girls as being high. So there was a whole array of protection put in place to keep them safe.
They've been orphaned at a young age, and that is a terrible thing, and especially in such a brutal and vicious attack like this was.
The girls were extremely vulnerable at that stage. The killer was still at large, and they were the only witnesses to this crime. So they were very highly protected.
Your heart goes out to them, absolutely goes out to them, because they would have had their life changed beyond all recognition.
In the UK, the investigators started to dig deeper into Zaid's relationship with his brother.
The French were focusing on that so-called dispute as a motive.
I think it's fair to say that the French investigators, whether Zaid had an alibi or not, were not deterred that he was behind the deaths of the Al-Hili family, not the killer, but the organiser behind the murders.
Puisqu'on savait qu'il était en Grande-Bretagne le 5 septembre, il avait fallu qu'il paye quelqu'un pour commettre le meurtre, il n'avait pas pu le faire lui-même.
Zaid's perception was that the dispute with his brother had been exaggerated from an early stage by the police. and whether he was playing that down wasn't clear.
Saad and his brother were in dispute over inheritance to do with the house. Half of the house is Zaid's and half is Saad's, and Saad's bringing up his family living there, and Zaid's living in a flat in Chessington.
Saad was worried that his brother wanted half the house, and he couldn't afford to mortgage it, he would lose the house.
They got quite acrimonious. What they both want seemed to be like poles apart.
Saad worried that his entire life would be turned on its head because his life was his family and his house. It was a shame that the relationship was breaking down. If I could mediate it, then I would, but obviously I didn't get a chance because Saad was then dead.
On le sait d'ailleurs, un grand nombre de meurtres ont pour origine l'environnement familial. Et je pense que Zaïd Halili a très vite compris qu'on le soupçonnait d'avoir été à l'origine du meurtre. Donc il était logique, au fond, qu'il conteste l'existence même du conflit familial.
When the police asked me about the dispute, I tried to explain to them there wasn't a feud, there was a disagreement, and that is true. But it's got nothing to do with the investigation. It's really a red herring. But the French prosecutor was on television in front of the world press.
Il ment, il l'a reconnu lui-même. La première fois, il a effectivement affirmé qu'il s'entendait parfaitement avec son frère, qu'il était extrêmement endeuillé lorsqu'il avait appris le décès de ce dernier. Lors de sa seconde interview, il a reconnu publiquement qu'il ne s'entendait pas si bien. Donc je dirais, on a au moins la preuve publique d'un mensonge de la part de Zaïd Halili.
People lie for all sorts of reasons, but it doesn't mean they've committed murder.
No, I didn't lie about it. Initially, I did probably deny it because I felt it was an irrelevant issue. That is my interpretation of things. If he wants to interpret it in a different way, well, that is his problem. This stupid man on television putting out all these rubbish about me, speculating. He twisted the whole case.
Clearly the whole investigation team felt Zaid had more to say and was hiding something around that dispute.
I had a knock on the door. It was the police with a search warrant to search the flat.
Zaid called me and explained that the police were searching his property. He couldn't understand why. I couldn't understand what caused the police to obtain a search warrant.
There were at least 7 police officers, only 2-bedroom flat, so it was quite busy. You know, all your space is invaded. They're going through everything. They had their tools there, taking out shower panels and that sort of thing. They were there till about 2 o'clock in the morning.
What they would be looking for is computers, documents, anything around a financial dispute, anything that would show that there was a reason for the Al-Hadi families to be murdered.
They took documents, everything they took. I had cash as well, they took that. It was very alarming having them there. All eyes on you and the whole world is watching you and your world is upside down. Nobody knows you, and now everybody knows you.
The search was extensive, but the investigation could find nothing to link Zaid to the murders.
The deaths of Iqbal and Jim Thompson, her first husband, on exactly the same day did prompt a lot of speculation.
It was strange to me that he did not have a post-mortem test, that he was just declared a heart attack. That's unusual to happen here in the United States, because if it's a questionable death, it's automatically required. I don't know, I find that strange.
Ce qui concerne donc Iqbal Halili, les services secrets américains se sont intéressés à elle. On a bien évidemment été amené à se poser la question de savoir si c'était pas elle la cible. Donc il fallait qu'on arrive à démontrer un lien très étroit entre la mort du premier mari d'Iqbal et la tuerie de Chevaline.
I just felt like there was something more to it. Maybe somebody was after her, the CIA, the FBI, the Secret Service, people in Iraq or whatever.
I think she came here to escape. Something ordered her back over there. Whether they threatened one of the family to make her go back, they had a hold of her. Whoever it was, I don't know who it was.
She probably told him what was really going on in her previous life or her life that she was going back to. I know that Jim knew something because he told me I'd understand later. I knew that things weren't right.
She had told something that the family didn't want to get out, and they took care of it.
I know this sounds really crazy. I think that somehow he was poisoned.
Everybody has secrets. Everybody has skeletons in their closet.
The FBI made a request to exhume Jim's body.
With no answers, the conspiracy theories went into overdrive as people tried to explain something that was simply inexplicable.
My opinion now, whatever killed him, a lethal dose or something, it's not going to show up.
When the FBI came into the picture to want to bring him up to see if he was murdered or if he died of natural causes, it was discussed with us. Obviously, we're his kids and we play a major role in that. I disagreed with it 100%, so I wouldn't let him do it. I was told that he died of a heart attack, you know, and I didn't think anything different because he was just a kind of overweight fella and just ate what tasted good.
Jim Thompson's body has never been exhumed, so the French investigators could never probe any further.
If there were secrets, Jim took them to his grave, unless, of course, they could be uncovered elsewhere.
L'enquête sur la tuerie d'Annecy passe par la Suisse. De l'argent a été saisi dans une banque à Genève.
La justice a saisi une somme d'argent dans une banque genevoise appartenant au père de Saad Halili.
French investigators, working with the Swiss police, discovered Saad al-Hilli had planned to travel across the border to Geneva just days before the murders.
Il téléphone le lundi après-midi.
He called the bank on Monday afternoon to say, I'm going to pop round to the bank, and he was dead on Wednesday. There's a closeness about the dates that is disturbing.
Detectives discovered the account was in the name of the Al-Hilli's late father, Kadem. It contained almost €1 million.
A Swiss bank account immediately triggers alarm bells. Most people don't have Swiss bank accounts because they don't need to hide their money.
The discovery of nearly €1 million in a Swiss bank account raised questions about where the money had come from.
There was a report that German intelligence agencies had uncovered that the money had been laundered on behalf of Saddam Hussein. The focus moved quite distinctly to Iraq.
Bien évidemment, il a fallu essayer de comprendre qu'est-ce que faisait Kadem Halili, le père de famille, en Irak. Il essayait de comprendre pourquoi il a quitté l'Irak.
There were suggestions that Zaid's father had murky finances tied up with that government and that there were financial issues as a result of that.
Was it dirty money from Iraq? And was that a motive for Saad to have been killed?
The French prosecutor made it pretty clear they were prepared to spend a lot of time and money pursuing these leads in Iraq. Now it seemed that the reason behind these murders might be
something to do with their background and something to do with where they came from.
People have a view of people from the Middle East. They put us in a box, even if they don't understand our backgrounds and how we sort of ended up abroad. In the 60s, Iraq was a lovely country. I think most Iraqis have lovely memories of their country. As far as I remember it, we had a perfect life there. Yeah, lovely pictures. Here's one of myself holding Saad when he was a baby. My father had his own business. He loved his work. He had to be strong in business to get things moving. It's a very comfortable lifestyle. We didn't ever think of leaving. It's only we had to.
Kadem Alili, donc c'était un chef d'entreprise qui avait des relations dans le monde politique. Je comprends, avec un frère de Saddam Hussein et avec un ancien Premier ministre. Et je comprends qu'il a quitté l'Irak en essayant de faire sortir une partie de sa fortune de l'Irak.
In 1968, there was a military coup. There were many arrests, some of our neighbors, our friends. The country was changing very fast.
After the coup, Saddam Hussein eventually took control of the country.
There was that feeling of being scared all the time, because there was security everywhere, people spying on you. And so we were always told to be quiet and not say things. And I think that impacts on you later on in life, where you're sort of afraid to express things, because it will bring us harm. Eventually, we left the country because my father had some allegations against him. There was always that hope. One day, things change and we will go back.
Saad did talk about the house they had in Iraq. They missed it. They missed that place. That was always something that used to eat away at him, really. He said we had the house and it was taken from us. And I think they had to leave in a hurry.
Saad went back to visit twice from my memory, and he loved it. He said, the air even smells different, although it was bombs going all over the place. But he probably liked that adventure.
Saad returned to Baghdad with Iqbal in 2003, after the fall of Saddam's regime.
Saad al-Hili had gone back to Baghdad fairly recently and had been beaten up while he was there, being attacked.
When he came back, he promised his wife never again to go because it was so unsafe.
Maybe there was something more sinister in Baghdad in the al-Hili family's past, and maybe Saad had somehow disturbed that.
On ne pouvait pas exclure éventuellement une vengeance, j'allais dire d'État, une vengeance étatique contre un chef d'entreprise qui avait fui le pays et qui avait réussi à sortir une partie de sa fortune personnelle d'Irak.
The Iraqi background was a major line of inquiry, and the only way that the French would have their questions answered is by going through Iraq.
In October, they said they were going to repatriate the bodies. And I said to the police, yes, please bring them back from that awful place. Those awful people, even, I said. And I arranged the burials. I buried my father in 2011. And then a year later, I was back burying my brother, his wife and her mother. It still feels unreal in many ways. It was difficult because the police were involved. We also had to tell them how many people will be attending. Even at the cemetery, there were armed police as well. It was unnecessary, uncomfortable for us and for the family. It's dramatizing something that has no reality.
It's unusual for the attendance of armed police at a funeral, but the investigation didn't have a clear idea of what's going on. Was this potentially a state-driven assassination? Was it something based in Iraq? The risk against the Al-Hili family and people attending the funeral was considered potentially high.
Having the press there was more annoying than having the police there, because they're always watching and commenting on what you're doing, trying to make something out of it, about me again. They're taking photos. I'm quite a private person, and all of a sudden I'm being talked about.
Zaid invited me to the funeral, which I was quite honoured. There was a speech, and they said, this is remembrance of the life of the family, and blood is more important than money. Basically, it was alluding to the fact that Zaid was being accused. He said, we don't discuss this at the funeral.
It's a peaceful place to come to. Of course, it's regretful that he's not around anymore. We all wish things could be different. The whole falling out was stupid and silly, and it shouldn't really have happened. But you can't turn the clock back.
After the funerals, the French police asked the Iraqi government to assist with the investigation.
The French authorities were desperate to obtain help from the police in Baghdad.
On a essayé d'y aller avec le magistrat instructeur, ça n'a jamais été possible. La situation militaire de l'époque, en termes de sécurité, interdisait le déplacement.
I had a telephone call from Iraq, from a prominent person in the government. And he said, who are these people, Al-Hili family? And so I told him. He said, well, they are asking a lot of questions here. To my knowledge, the Iraqi government, they didn't investigate. And that was expected because Iraq was in a very bad state at that time. People were killed in the streets. So 2 Iraqi people or 3 were killed in France. It's of no big deal to them.
The idea that my family was involved with Saddam laundering money was completely ridiculous. My father had a Swiss bank account for a long time, for many years. That was his pension pot. There's nothing untoward about it.
Al-Hili family were really hurt by the Saddam regime, and they left the country to claim that they have laundering money on his behalf. No way that this would happen.
There was no direct evidence that this was a state-sponsored hit in any way. There was no direct evidence that this was any form of espionage at all. But because we could never draw a firm negative against that scenario, it was always hanging there.
As the investigation faltered in Iraq, in France, the police uncovered key evidence that put further suspicion on Zaid.
Saad al-Hili avait sur lui et avec lui tout ce qui concernait la succession de son père.
Examination of wills found in the Al-Hili's caravan provided more evidence of the dispute between Zaid and Saad.
L'un des documents majeurs, c'était la découverte de 2 testaments. Un testament qui avait pour effet de parvenir à faire en sorte que Zaid al-Hili soit le seul héritier, et un testament qui aboutissait à un partage des biens entre les 2 frères.
The police were saying that there were 2 wills and that one of them had been falsified. All of this evidence was of concern to me.
Les enquêteurs ont acquis la conviction que Zaid al-Hili avait eu la tentation de s'accaparer la succession de son père.
And certainly from the French angle, this was further clear evidence from their perspective. Zaid must have been involved in the murders.
C'est grosso modo que l'héritage de Kadem Alili est de l'ordre de quelques millions d'euros, 3, 4, 5, c'est difficile à estimer. On sait en même temps que des gens sont capables de tuer pour beaucoup, beaucoup moins que cela.
Saad, in amongst one of our online conversations, said his brother had been to his father and he basically got him to sign a blank will, and then his brother had filled it in. Saad didn't get anything, or he didn't get what he felt was his fair share.
There were no two wills. There's no such thing. There's only one original document, and that was made by my father, and he put my name on it. He asked me later to put my brother's name on the will. It was as simple as that. Saad knew about the will. He photocopied the original will. Probably that's where their confusion arose.
Saad was of the view that his brother was cheating him, really, out of his rightful inheritance.
By this point, he didn't trust his brother.
This fueled the expectation that the inheritance dispute between the two brothers must be the reason behind these murders.
Clearly there was a possible motive for Zaid to want his brother dead. The French were very keen to ramp up those inquiries.
The last conversation I had with Saad, he was worried about who would look after his daughters if something happened to them. And I said, well, it's not likelihood that anything's going to happen. Why he was thinking like that, I don't know. But then a few months later, they were killed.
British investigators discovered that police had been called to Saad's home address at Claygate about a year before the murders took place, following a physical altercation between Saad and Zaid.
We were told that the dispute had reached such a level of hatred and bitterness that they actually came to physical blows inside the family house. The French prosecutor also revealed that that was the last time that they had seen each other.
There was this physical fight that the police had been called out to. So clearly there was evidence that the falling out may have been objectively seen as being more serious than that which Zaid had said.
It appeared Zaid al-Hili was not giving a completely clear, transparent picture of what had happened.
Les enquêteurs ont établi qu'il avait changé son système de vidéosurveillance et qu'il avait changé également les serrures de son domicile. Les éléments qu'on a recueillis auprès de la famille, plusieurs ont dit que Saad craignait pour sa vie.
We also knew from neighbours that Saad was in great fear for his life at that point, and he was very worried about something that might happen to him.
For Zaid, we had a lot of evidence around motive. What we didn't have was any evidence linking him to the killings.
Newspapers reported a possible breakthrough. Suspicious phone calls made to Eastern Europe, just weeks before the murders.
Phone calls to Romania certainly seemed to suggest some kind of link to an assassin.
Zaid was suspected of conspiracy to murder, which means that he was conspiring with somebody else to undertake the killings. It was vital that we looked at phone calls he made with people either in this country or abroad.
It was something that, without proper explanation, was very damaging to Zaid.
I never made any calls to Romania. I don't know anybody in Romania. I told them, well, if you're that concerned about these numbers, just why don't you call them and see who they are?
All we knew is that phone calls had been made to Romania and that they ceased just before the death of his brother.
24th of June, the police turned up at my address.
I took the decision that Zaid should be arrested for conspiracy to murder.
Pour la première fois, une personne a été arrêtée. Il s'agit de Zaid Al-Hili.
Zaid Al-Hili is now being interviewed in Surrey on suspicion of conspiracy to commit murder.
The decision to arrest somebody for murder is one that I would never take lightly. He will be judged by his friends, his family, people will know him. He will be hounded by media. People would assume that he was guilty.
Le frère n'est pas soupçonné d'être le tireur puisqu'il a un alibi, mais il devra expliquer pourquoi il a appelé plusieurs fois la Roumanie avant le meurtre.
French prosecutors want to find the people responsible and give the two young girls who survived this an answer as to why their parents were murdered in front of them.
When you receive a call from the police to attend the police station, you don't know at that point what evidence that they have.
I've heard from the news that Zaid was arrested. I didn't believe that Zaid has done it. But in the back of your mind, that why did they arrest him? That means they have something strong against him.
We only see what's reported. So we're not privy to what the police know or why they come to the conclusions they come to.
What do they know that we don't know?
On attending the police station, I didn't know what new evidence we were going to be faced with. At that point, I'm concerned. I think it's legitimate to expect that the police have got something substantial that they want to put to him. Zaid was clearly very upset, concerned, worried what was going to happen to him.
Where is this going to lead to? Your mind goes into, oh, they're fabricating evidence here. They're going to frame you for something.
It's important to understand the reason for arrest can equally be to disprove that person's involvement as proving it. Because by this point I had a different theory which could change everything. And if I was right, there was no way that Zaid could be behind the killings.
Support information for the issues raised can be found online at channel4.com/support. And the third and final episode, To Murder in the Alps, continues next here on Channel 4.
It's very easy to become obsessed with a case like this. You're always wondering, what if I've missed something? One of the things I've learned in my 30 years as a police officer is that you have to keep an open mind. Your first thought of what happened at the scene might be wrong. You have to be willing to continually reconsider everything if you're to have any chance of catching the killer.
In France, the police have launched a multiple murder inquiry near Lake Annecy.
In September 2012, 4 people were shot dead in the French Alps.
There was a lot of blood and heads with bullet holes in them.
Why Saad? Why his family?
3 of the victims were from one family in Surrey, leaving 2 young daughters orphaned at the scene.
Late last night, an astonishing discovery. A 4-year-old girl found alive under dead bodies inside the car.
The 4th victim was local French cyclist Sylvain Wallier.
The motive for their murder is a mystery.
Every one of the victims shot in the head.
The police began to investigate if this was a targeted assassination.
On a vraiment le sentiment que Sylvain Mollier ne pouvait pas être une cible.
We found a number of documents, computers, hard disks.
Stranger still, they couldn't find the Al-Hili's passports. Were the passports taken by an assassin
Could Saad be a spy?
Detectives pursued leads around the globe.
Then I got a text. This is the FBI.
Everybody has secrets. Everybody has skeletons in their closet.
French prosecutor Eric Maillot is now convinced the key to solving the Alps massacre lies over here.
A family dispute over money is one of their lines of investigation.
Saad's brother Zaid became the prime suspect.
Saad didn't trust Zaid anymore.
They had fallen out over inheritance.
Phone calls to Romania ceased just before the death of his brother.
In my view, an over-reliance on just one theory has blinkered and damaged the investigation.
Targeted execution.
A professional
All
kill.
shot in the head.
The Secret Service.
€1 million.
Iraqi spy.
On some nuclear stuff.
Somehow he was poisoned.
Why were they shot?
When I was first appointed to the case, it was essential to visit the crime scene. The first thing that struck me was the smallness of the car park. It's not much more than a lay-by. Very secluded.
Mark Preston took over as the British senior investigating officer 8 months after the murders.
When you come in cold to an investigation, you have to have independent thinking, a fresh pair of eyes, and not be swayed by already established theories. The initial theory within the first few days of the investigation was that Saad al-Hili was the intended target, that Saad was most likely shot first, and that the French cyclist Sylvain Mollier was simply a witness. What did puzzle me is that the al-Hilis just seemed to be an ordinary family from Surrey who decided to go on a last-minute holiday with their 2 daughters, Zina and Zainab. And that morning they decided to come up here just for a walk. Minutes later, most of the family were dead. If the al-Hilis were targets, who would have known they were here? That just did not make sense. I did spend a long time trying to see it from the different perspectives, trying to see it from each member of the al-Hili family, from Mollier's perspective, from the gunman's perspective. Bang. Shot there. If anybody was standing here looking at me when I was trying to figure out the scene, they'd have probably been laughing at me because I was running up and down here. I just wanted to understand in my mind what I think had happened. Bang. With most investigations, it's quite clear who the intended target is, but I felt with this investigation, it was far from clear. And of course, finding out the intended target gives you a far better opportunity of finding out who the killer is. So the main theory at that time was the gunman was hidden down a gully, down here. Now that's doable, but why? To me, it just didn't make sense. You're standing down here and you've got no view, and there's no view up the hill. From the gunman's perspective, there's no need to be here, nor does it afford a particularly quick exit. So for me, that's a non-starter. This is where I think the gunman was certainly when the attack was launched, because it gives me a view up and it gives me a view down. Not only that, but then there's evidence that tells us that actually the first shots were fired from here, discharged bullet casings in this area. If you can work out where the gunman is standing, it helps you understand who they're intending to kill. The main hypothesis still focused on Saad being the intended victim, and Mollier and the rest of the al-Hili families were perhaps collateral damage. But my view was otherwise. Could something else have happened here? Could Mollier be the target and the al-Hilis simply executed as collateral damage? So if Sylvain Mollier was the target, that could change everything. On the other hand, we had mounting evidence suggesting a motive to murder against Zaid. We still had to deal with that.
Zaid Hilli was arrested around 7:30 this morning. He'd previously spoken to police as a witness, but the arrest was on suspicion of conspiracy to murder.
The French had questions that needed to be answered. Zaid had to be allowed to respond to those questions, and we had to demonstrate that we have done everything that we can to prove or disprove Zaid's involvement in a conspiracy to murder.
Over the next 24 hours, British police questioned Zaid, while the French monitored the interview from another room.
I've never been arrested before. I was frightened. I don't know what they were planning.
Zaid was clearly very upset, concerned, worried what was going to happen to him. You've got to remember that he'd been under suspicion for the best part of 10 months. It must have been so conflicting for him to have to mourn his family, but at the same time being accused of killing them.
We knew that Zaid had an alibi, but certainly didn't mean that he couldn't be involved in a conspiracy to murder.
My lawyer said, I advise you to give no comment answers. Well, initially, I didn't listen to him because I was angry. And what I was saying to them, why don't you go back to the statements that I made? You asked me all those questions. My lawyer stopped the interview. He said, can I speak to you again? So he said, just do no comment. So we did no comment after that.
Zaid was asked questions about the financial dispute.
No comment.
The changing by side of the locks.
No comment.
About the formulation of the will.
No comment.
Talk about the incident where they had physically had a fight.
No comment.
About bank accounts, other financial matters.
No comment.
Discussions about Iraq.
No comment.
Throughout, Zaid replied, no comment.
There was a clear difficulty between the French and the British about the sort of questions that were being put to Zaid.
I do get the sense that many of their interviews are far more confrontational, almost a, you did do it, didn't you? You know, or telling people, you did do it.
Son avocat lui a demandé de ne pas répondre la plupart du temps aux questions qui lui étaient posées, donc il ne peut pas dire qu'il ait coopéré à l'enquête absolument partout.
One line of questioning was the phone calls to Romania.
As far as the French police were concerned, seemed to mean that Zaid had spoken to a Romanian assassin.
Well, that's not true. I don't have anybody in Romania. It was another piece of nonsense. I think it was denied later on. I think he said he got it wrong.
Et après avoir relu mes notes, il me semble bien que ça n'est pas Zaid qui avait contacté des gens en Roumanie, mais Saad. C'est Saad Halili qui avait des contacts téléphoniques en Roumanie. On n'avait pas l'ombre d'une explication sur ses liens avec la Roumanie.
I wasn't going to let them intimidate me. We were intimidated in 1970. We left one country, and I'm not going to be intimidated again by anyone.
After 24 hours in custody, Zaid was released on bail to allow further investigation.
I felt the French investigators were of the view there's a motive there, they've just not found the evidence, and still wanted us to push and push and push, almost having a dig at the quality of the British investigation.
One year on, the mystery continues. Scores of police officers on both sides of the channel are involved in the investigation.
Sunflowers, I think it would be nice. Yeah.
Theories have been explored and discarded. A lone madman, a contract killing, a family row. None of them quite seems to fit.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye. On the anniversary of my brother's murder, we're taken back to the day. All that stuff comes back to you.
Zaid had been on bail for 3 months, while the police carried on investigating him.
I think he would have been shocked that I would be arrested for his murder. He would be very angry. We were very close. I have lots of dreams where I see my brother. I ask him, where have you been? You're not dead. People thought you were dead. He's with me every day. It feels hurtful that we had a falling out and that we never had the chance to resolve that and for it to become so public. And the authorities who are supposed to protect people were the ones who instigated all that discussion.
Un an tout juste après le quadruple meurtre de Chevaline en Haute-Savoie, l'énigme n'est toujours pas résolue.
In Annecy later today, investigators will talk publicly about their latest findings.
On the first anniversary of the murders, we helped in the media interview.
Cette affaire est très complexe. C'est une affaire internationale, d'où la présence des enquêteurs anglais aujourd'hui. C'est une affaire qui demandera beaucoup de temps. Il faudra aussi un peu de chance.
Is it how I would have run a conference? I'm not sure it's how any of the investigators within Britain would have chosen to run that conference. I needn't have been there. I don't think my French equivalent need have been there. The only person that needed to be there was the French prosecutor. We were used simply to reinforce the message that he wanted to give.
Sylvain Mollier, je sais qu'il y a des débats, malheureusement, il s'est trouvé là au mauvais moment, au mauvais endroit, et que ce n'est qu'une victime collatérale de cette scène de crime.
In my view, the first anniversary press conference was a justification of face-saving, if you will, on behalf of the prosecutor as to why it hadn't been detected after so long.
Donc entre les deux frères, il y a ce conflit. Il a donc un mobile, effectivement, l'argent de cet héritage.
Eric Mayo's view that the answers lie in the UK, that the Al-Hillis were the intended target, may well have been appropriate. I think where Eric Mayo was wrong was saying it publicly. I don't think we should be saying to the media, they are the targets. This is what's happened.
Ce sont les membres de la famille qui ont pu le dire, que cet héritage a entraîné un conflit extrêmement violent entre Saad et Zaïd.
Was it frustrating? Yes, it's frustrating.
Je l'ai dit, le conflit était violent et obsédait littéralement.
I was very angry at the time. I wish somebody would have intervened to tell the French prosecutor to shut up, but no one did.
From what they said at the press conference, I assumed that they must have some really damning evidence that Zaid was involved with these murders.
I do wonder whether we stepped back too much and just allowed the French to lead the media.
On the 14th of January, I was called to go to the police station.
I was not worried as such, but I was sure there is something wrong.
Zaid had now been on bail for 7 months, while the police continued to look for any evidence against him.
Used every tool that we could. That means the overt means, and it means covert means.
We are more than friends, me, Saad and Zaid. We were like brothers. I would be the saddest man in this world if it transpired that Zaid has done it.
In Surrey, after 16 months and hundreds of man-hours of investigation, there was a major turning point in the case.
The press were outside. Mark said, I will deal with them.
We decided to give a very clear steer that he was no longer a suspect. Zaid was arrested on the 24th of June on conspiracy to commit murder. At this stage, there is insufficient evidence to charge Zaid with any criminal offence, and therefore there's going to be no further police action. We never found evidence of him being involved in the planning of or the arranging of Saad's murder. We could never find any inkling of Zaid being involved in conspiracy to murder.
Saad's brother was a
bookkeeper,
not an SAS officer. You know, he was 55 kilos wet through or something. He's not the sort of person that could organise to kill somebody.
It was true that their relationship had broken down. But inheritance disputes are very common. That doesn't make somebody a murderer. At the end of the day, I don't believe that Zaid has had anything to do with his brother's murder.
Ziad al-Hili emerged from his apartment in Chessington, saying only that he was just relieved at the news he wouldn't be bailed again.
Zaid had always protested his innocence.
And he believed that it was a mistake for the police to devote so much resources to the UK.
When there was no further action, I felt relief and I felt angry because what they put us through, me personally and as a family.
Zaid was no longer under investigation. The French had also finally made public the sketch of the motorcyclist, witnessed near the crime scene.
A sketch has been released of a man police want to speak to over the murder of a British family shot dead in the French Alps.
He has a goatee beard and he's wearing a rare motorcycle helmet that opens from the side.
It was odd that the police had held on to the EFIT image for so long before they finally released it to the media. It seemed that they were finally widening their investigation after training so much of their focus on Zaid and the al-Hili family in the UK.
French detectives discovered only 8,000 of these distinctive helmets had ever been made, so they focused on trying to track down every one of them.
Les enquêteurs ont cherché en vain depuis. Investigators have searched in vain for months to find the helmet, speaking to witnesses, people in the motorcycling world, and with internet retailers. Sur Internet à l'occasion de ventes.
We know that that cyclist was at the scene prior to, possibly during, the shooting.
French police hope this image will provide the breakthrough they've been striving for. Enda Brady, Sky News.
But investigators had another line of inquiry they hoped might lead them to the killer.
Initially, the French authorities were able to narrow down the type of weapon that was used by the shell casings. It was a 7.65mm handgun.
On espérait remonter au propriétaire initial de cette arme, d'ailleurs d'où est venue cette arme.
Towards the end of the attack, the killer either ran out of ammunition or he had a stoppage or a malfunction, because then he used the handgun to attack young Zanib al-Hili.
When 7-year-old Zainab was discovered in the car park near the other 4 victims, she'd been shot and badly beaten.
Elle avait reçu une balle à l'épaule. Elle avait été frappée très fortement à la tête, vraisemblablement par la crosse de l'arme.
As a result, part of the grip came off the weapon and they found it at the scene.
Cet élément décoratif de l'arme et sur laquelle on a trouvé l'ADN de Zainab.
They were then able to conclude that the gun used was a .06 Luger. It's highly rated as a handgun. Ergonomically, it's extremely comfortable, very accurate at close range. It served the purpose, sadly, very well.
The Luger .06 pistol was
developed in the early 1900s.
These pistols were standard issue for conscripts into the Swiss army, which includes every male of a certain age in Switzerland.
And to protect their freedom and their neutrality, there is a citizen army of 600,000. Mountain brigades trained for alpine fighting.
Unusually, those men would have been able to keep the gun after they finished their national service. This meant that there were potentially thousands of these pistols in people's homes and would be a very, very difficult gun to trace.
C'est une arme qui est meurtrière. Maintenant, c'est pas une arme qui est très fiable, c'est une arme qui est complètement dépassée. C'est pas une arme qui pourrait être utilisée par des professionnels ou par rapport à des armes modernes qui existent.
Identifying the gun allowed investigators to build a profile of the killer.
The nature of the gun indicated to me that it was going to be a local or locally based offender.
Saad al-Hili devait accélérer fortement. Le tueur a réussi à atteindre ses victimes au travers des fenêtres, alors que le véhicule vraisemblablement était en mouvement.
We also knew that at least 21 shots had been fired in under 2 minutes, including a reload of the gun.
Cela aussi permettait de considérer qu'on avait affaire à un tireur particulièrement aguerri. Ce n'est pas le tireur du dimanche qui va au stand de tir pour se faire plaisir.
slightly irritated me, I think, at the time, was the idea that the victims had been shot in the head, which the media immediately associated with a professional kill. You're hardly going to kill somebody by shooting them in the buttocks. These were defenceless, unarmed people sat in a vehicle. They were a very easy target. I personally thought this individual, in the initial stage of the attack, made a complete and utter hash of it. Saad El-Hili, poor devil, almost managed to escape. He managed to get back in his car and was in the process of getting away. Professional?
When we found out the age of the weapon, it certainly led me away from thinking this was a state-sponsored assassination. More likely to be somebody local with police or military experience, somebody who knows how to handle a gun.
A 48-year-old man's been arrested in France after this image was released back in November of a motorcyclist seen near where the shootings took place.
3 months after the release of the sketch, investigators made another arrest.
Police were searching a garden today with metal detectors. The man they have in custody bears a striking resemblance to this artist's impression of a motorcyclist seen in the Cheveline forest at the time of the murders.
Dans le café qu'il fréquentait habituellement, sa garde à vue est une surprise.
Je lui ai montré le journal en lui disant « Et là, Eric, dis donc, ce serait pas toi le tueur de Chevaline », mais c'était vraiment sur le ton de la plaisanterie, et voilà.
The French police told the press that his mobile phone had shown them that he was definitely in the vicinity at the time.
On a quelqu'un qui présente une très forte ressemblance physique avec cet homme qui était dans la grande proximité de la scène de crime.
He owned a motorcycle and had quite an extensive collection of weapons similar to the murder weapon.
On a effectivement découvert à son domicile un Luger P08, fabrication allemande, calibre 9 mm.
And he had a manual for the exact Luger P06 pistol.
Les enquêteurs ont découvert une quarantaine d'armes de guerre, essentiellement en lien avec la Seconde Guerre mondiale.
He was somebody who crucially would have known the routes to take to get away very quickly.
Monsieur Devoissou était un ancien policier municipal qui avait fait qu'il avait été renvoyé. Donc, s'est aperçu qu'il achetait des armes de manière pas tout à fait légale.
The development has been welcomed by the last man to be questioned, Saad El-Hili's brother.
I was very encouraged by what appeared in the news. All we are seeking are the truth and to find out what happened that day and why.
The fact that this man had 40 guns in his home just down the road from where the murders took place didn't fill me with confidence that they were on top of this case. We didn't know how many other people like that could be living in that area.
He absolutely fitted the profile. My hopes were high that we had our man.
After the motorcyclist was questioned in custody, the detective's main lead collapsed. Eric Devoissou was released without charge.
Ce qui fait que j'ai dû diffuser un communiqué de presse pour indiquer qu'on n'avait strictement aucun élément à charge contre lui.
It turned out that this man's motorcycle and helmet didn't match the one seen by the witnesses. And although he did own many guns, none of them actually matched the murder weapon.
Être impliqué dans une affaire de ce type, c'est nécessairement se voir coller une étiquette sur le front. Il a d'ailleurs été licencié de l'aéroport de Genève, très peu de temps après.
After his release, Eric Devoissou said his life had been completely ruined. It was hard not to feel some sympathy for him. But at the same time, he had only been under suspicion for just a few days, whereas Zaid had been under investigation for more than a year.
At the time, I was very angry. I still feel angry about how the press treated me. We were the victims of this crime. You feel everybody's against you. The press is hounding you, putting out all these false stories. Because we are from Iraq, from the Middle East, being Arab, being Muslim, I think we were fair game to them.
And the media reports very quickly suggested that the Al-Hili families were the intended victims. And the unfortunate truth is that it was a spin on a story that was entirely fictional.
So there was a lot of stuff about Saad's origins, being in Iraq.
It was a Mossad hit, yeah.
And I just thought, absolute load of rubbish.
The murder became a secondary story, told a fantasy, in my view. He was not a terrorist or money laundering for the Saddam Hussein regime.
So when Saad's uncle was tortured by Saddam Hussein's secret police, Saddam years later gave him some money. I think possibly not.
You know, good stories sell newspapers.
I think the focus on the Al-Hilis, with Zaid portrayed as a pantomime villain almost, suited the French police, that this was a foreign crime, and it suited us as well, because it was such an amazing tale with so many fascinating elements to it.
Some of the media reports were unhelpful. You can actually lose vital evidence and vital witness evidence by false reporting.
Maybe somewhere along the line the media got in the way of a proper investigation.
These are all the articles I've collected over the years. There's quite a big collection here.
Among the many column inches written about the Al-Hilis, one article told a different story. A story about the French cyclist Sylvain Mollier.
I think I stumbled on it by chance. It was an article which encapsulated my fears about this investigation. Slain alpine cyclist in feud over lover's fortune.
Until the Sunday Times article, there had been virtually no opinions at all relating to Sylvain Mollier.
An investigation has unearthed details of Mollier's rather tempestuous private life.
Sylvain Mollier had only recently been in a new relationship with a woman whose family owned a business said to be worth more than £1 million.
Sylvain had growing claims on Claire's fortune.
That he'd spent £4,000 on the bike that was used on that day, and also that he'd taken 3 years off work, very unusual for someone with his professional background.
The opinion was this was something Claire's family was not happy about.
Question was whether that investigation around Mollier's intended target had been completed too quickly, and perhaps whether it had been too shallow.
The families decided to employ French privacy law and had hired a lawyer to monitor the press. It seemed to me quite extraordinary that they were going to these lengths.
On n'a strictement rien trouvé qui puisse laisser à penser que ce soit le meurtre soit lié à l'environnement de la famille Schutz-Mollier, et le couple, en tout cas, s'entendait à merveille.
As a journalist, I'm used to being told to go away, but the wall of silence around Sylvain Mollier was unlike anything I've experienced anywhere else.
As questions were raised, French forensic investigators released a report detailing their findings from the crime scene.
We receive a full ballistics report, and it's a hugely impressive document which helps paint a far clearer picture of what happened on the day of the killings, being how the bullets entered and exited the body and the trajectory. In my view, the ballistics report supports what I think happened at the scene. When the French police arrived, Mollier's body was quite some distance from his bike, almost at the other end of the car park. Mollier's bike was here, and the chain had come off the sprockets. Through the ballistics report, we know that the angle of the first shots suggests Mollier was bending down, perhaps doing the chain, sorting the chain out. The killer is literally here, possibly even speaking to Mollier as Mollier's bending over and bang, bang. And having been shot, Mollier has turned and run. As he's running, he's taken more shots and has fallen around about this area here. You have Saad, who's by now, having heard at least 4 gunshots, is jumping back into this side of the car. We know that the first bullet that Saad took was in his back. So Saad then reversed at speed, but the car became stuck in the bank. And that then allowed the killer to shoot all 3 adults in the head. Zainab Al-Hili never made it back into the car. She was found unconscious on one side of the car, opposite the body of Sylvain Mollier. In my view, the direction of travel of the bullets through Mollier's body suggested that he was shot first and shot twice, at least, before Saad was shot. Now, it would seem the killer's final actions in the car park were something that I could only describe as an execution-style shot just beneath the eye of Mollier as he lay already dying, potentially already dead. You don't need to be a seasoned investigator to realise that the person who was shot first, last and most is not going to be the witness. It's going to be the intended target. To me, it was very clear the killer wanted Mollier dead.
I definitely felt Eric Mayo spoke far less about Sylvain Mollier and even sometimes seemed to go out of his way to rubbish suggestions that this case might have anything to do with Mollier.
On pouvait penser que Sylvain Mollier n'était pas vraiment la cible. C'est sans doute la raison pour laquelle j'en ai moins parlé, effectivement. De savoir précisément quelle balle a atteint qui en premier. C'est scientifiquement strictement impossible. La logique voudrait que Saad Al-Hili ait été touché en premier, mais en fait, on n'en sait strictement rien.
For Eric Mayo to publicly admit that Sylvain Mollier could be the target would be a 180-degree turn and would be a major embarrassment for the investigation.
L'hypothèse que Sylvain Mollier ait pu être une cible était étudiée de manière extrêmement approfondie et on n'a rien trouvé. Alors, mais pour pouvoir ensuite avoir un tueur qui s'en prenne à Sylvain Mollier et qui tue ensuite une famille, c'est quelque chose que les enquêteurs n'arrivent pas à comprendre.
I had a view very different from the French. If I was right and the Al-Hilis were not the intended targets, all of the inquiries in the UK, you could almost consider overnight being stopped. The answer now lies in France. If Mollier was the target, that needed further investigation. My personal view at that point was one of absolute frustration. I was continually assured that appropriate inquiries were being done in France, but I didn't see that.
Over the next year, there were no significant developments in the case.
There comes a point in any investigation where you're not getting where you need to go, where you conduct a bit of a review. We took a deep breath and dived in to see if there were any lines of inquiry that we could discount.
Sur ce chemin forestier.
From day 2, the French investigators were quite convinced that Saad Al-Hili was the intended target.
The prosecutor in particular made frequent reference to industrial espionage as a potential motive.
And then, of course, there were the missing passports that led us to believe that this could have been a state-sponsored assassination.
Saad Al-Hili might have been a target for assassination by Iraq.
Theory said that Saad is a spy. I really couldn't imagine that.
The more we spoke to his employers, we were comfortable that Saad didn't have access to any secret information.
The big important stuff that Saad had been working on was one bracket of the coffee machine in the 380 Airbus.
Saad wasn't a spy. And we had this financial dispute as a potential motive.
There was a continual drip of this was all to do with a feud between the two of them. There just seemed to be nothing evidentially which pointed in Zaid's direction.
Do I think Zaid was involved? Absolutely not. And in fact, through the whole investigation, there was never any evidence found which shows that the Al-Hilis were the intended target. Once we'd looked at lines of inquiry that we felt were going nowhere, we looked for missed opportunities. What I've seen from Brett Martin's account, it gave me cause for concern.
Brett Martin was the first witness on the scene. He felt that the initial procedure was a little bit dishevelled. He was stood there in his blooded cycling clothing from his actions helping Zaneb Al-Hili. He was never questioned at the scene. His blooded cycle clothes were not taken from him, and when he arrived home, his dear wife put them in the washing machine.
Je n'ai pas de souvenir que Brett Martin ait pu retourner en Angleterre avec ses vêtements tachés de sang. Si on ne lui a pas demandé, oui, pour moi, c'était effectivement une erreur.
Well, if you can miss this, what else did you miss?
It's fair to say that my view of the forensic recovery was poor. Some 2 years after the Al-Hilis were murdered, we were informed by a very sheepish French investigation saying that the passports were found in their laboratory.
In the pocket of his jacket, which had been kept in a forensic lab.
En fait, et là c'est malheureusement, mais ça arrive, une maladresse des enquêteurs, les passeports étaient restés dans une veste de Saad Al-Hili.
How could I trust the forensic results when something so obvious as passports were entirely missed?
C'est une erreur matérielle, mais qui, sans conséquence, et comme nous sommes tous des êtres humains, il nous arrive parfois de commettre une erreur.
My view is that that was a significant distraction to the inquiry. I look back and do regret the amount of staff hours that we put into that were unnecessary. It was incredibly frustrating.
Couldn't really believe that they hadn't properly searched through the clothing before then. It reminded me of how young Zena had been left in the back of the car. It didn't fill me with confidence that they had dealt with the evidence properly. It seemed that this whole investigation had been badly handled from the outset.
The French investigation seemed to want to explore links between Zaid and Saad over inheritance. They want to explore links with espionage, they want to explore links with terrorism, they want to explore links with Iqbal's former husband who died of a heart attack in the USA. They don't seem to be wanting to explore a link of a French national shot on French soil right under their nose. They don't want to look there.
By the end of the review, I felt the evidence showed that we had been looking in the wrong direction. And a very, very thorough dossier was produced to say this is a line of inquiry that you really should be following, which was completely dismissed. It fell on deaf ears. Sylvain Mollier, as the intended target, I do think was closed down far too quickly. In my view, an absolute refusal to acknowledge anything other than the Al-Hilis were the target has blinkered and damaged the investigation.
The investigation has now been running for nearly 10 years. Eric Mayo stood down as prosecutor in 2016. 3 years later, Mark Preston retired from the police. To date, there have been a total of 5 arrests, the most recent in 2022.
French police have arrested a suspect in connection with the unsolved murder of a British family and a French cyclist in the Alps in 2012.
The man arrested was the motorcyclist witnessed near the crime scene, who 7 years earlier had finally been tracked down and questioned by the police.
There was a huge revival of interest in the case, but the day afterwards he was released, and the police stated that they didn't believe he had anything to do with what had happened.
The Alps murders remain unsolved.
Il est vrai, au-delà du drame humain, au-delà de la souffrance des victimes survivantes, et bien évidemment de la famille de Sylvain Mollier, de la famille de Sylvain Alili et des deux fillettes auxquelles je pense toujours souvent, cette affaire est une véritable affaire qui pourrait être le support d'un roman. Il y a des questions qui se posent à l'infini, et je ne suis pas sûr qu'on ait toutes les réponses.
I hope we will have answers, but I just feel we will never get there. I think they covered it up. Somebody wanted Sylvain Mollier dead that day. Important people in the area are involved in it.
Zaïd Alili aurait eu pour métier non pas de gérer un golf, mais il aurait été lui-même un policier aguerri. Je serais peut-être enclin à le croire. Il n'y a rien qui puisse laisser à penser que Sylvain Mollier soit un personnage d'une telle importance pour l'État français qu'il faille dissimuler l'origine de sa mort. Enfin, pas vraiment que c'est du fantasme.
I think the idea that this was a cover-up seems far-fetched. A more likely explanation might just be incompetence. Equally, they may be just unable to solve what is a really, really difficult crime with very little evidence to go on.
I think about him every day. I think about my brother every day. I think about what happened every day. The girls want answers. They'll be asking me, what did you do to find those answers as their uncle? And they deserve answers. It's not going to leave me until we find the truth. Saad is my only brother. We shared a lot together. After my wife passed away, he's always there. And when I was on my own, he keeps on phoning me, why don't you come over here?
Looking back 10 years on, I'm quite clear on the mistakes that I made, because I did make mistakes. I couldn't get the investigation in France to change direction, and that I bitterly regret. A different mindset could have led somewhere. I think there were actions which were not prioritised as highly as maintaining the relationship between the British and the French, which I think was wrong. This is about finding the truth. These families need justice.
And support information for the issues raised can be found online at channel4.com/support.